Hey everybody, glad to be back with you. My name is Josh, and I wanted to speak to you a little bit this afternoon about what it looks like to deal with intimidation. It can't be denied that we live in an intimidating world. We have things like the coronavirus, which we still in many ways don't understand, these threats from without that we didn't expect. But as believers and followers of God, we face certain kinds of intimidation that go beyond just physical threats, but are psychological and spiritual in nature. We know we have an enemy in Satan, but we also have friends and family who disapprove of the way that we live or attack our faith. There are online trolls, attackers, people who go after both our church, who go after us as individuals, and certainly go after the things that we believe as Bible-believing Christians. And all of this can amount to a certain level of fear, a certain self-perspective that Christians carry around, that we are just in this losing position when it comes to being matched up against the world system in our society and what it believes. And so, why shouldn't we be intimidated? Why shouldn't we just give in to what our culture says and to the attacks that we often experience when we're trying to live radical lives for God? Well, the first reason that I want to share with you today is that giving in is not going to help. I like what Proverbs 29 says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." Yeah, fear of man is a trap. Have you ever tried to appease someone who is trying to manipulate you or scare you or control you? They're never satisfied by basic concessions. They want more and more and more. So in the same way, if we think that we're going to water down the truth, if we think that we're going to practice, less commitment to the cause of Jesus, and that's somehow going to fix the problem, we are kidding ourselves. Real safety and real security is found in a relationship with God. It's walking in the paths of the Lord that is what makes us safe, not giving in to the pressure of our society. Another reason that we shouldn't give in to the pressures of our world is that it's passing away. The world and its desires are passing away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. Our culture is very fickle. The things that our society values, the things that go viral online, all that kind of stuff, it's there one moment, it's gone the next. Decade to decade, our society's views of things like sexual ethics, human rights, all of these things, it just depends on what's in vogue and what's happening in the world. Many of us remember the things that people parroted and said 20 years ago and how different those things are, how different those animating values are from what people say they believe and do today. But the will of God is something which lasts forever. It is a wiser proposition to base your life on what God says than in whatever is currently trending online or vogue in our society. I really like author Mark Sayers and what he says about what's happening in our culture right now. He says, the promises of our cultural and political elites that things are going to get better are falling flat. We have endless opportunities to pursue pleasure in our desires, yet so many of us are miserable and anxious. We can traverse geography, time, and space, yet loneliness is growing. Silicon Valley's promises that a world connected by social media will be better and more tolerant, that world now looks ridiculous. The assurances that a globalized world will be fairer, more peaceful, and prosperous seem shaky. These failed promises are fueling a growing sense of dissatisfaction, a desire to see things change. I think that's totally true. You see that from people on the political right, people on the political left, people of all different backgrounds. There's a sense that our society is currently failing. It's not working the way that it's supposed to. And people are out grasping for answers. They're also pointing fingers every possible direction, looking for who to blame. And often the church or often God himself gets caught in that crossfire. But then Sayers says, in the chaos of our Western cultural system, we see God's presence at work. We must view that what God is doing in our world through the lens of his presence. The failures that we see in our societies, structures, and systems, their inability to truly deliver what our hearts desire, these just illuminate their incapacity to replace God. I think that basic point is so important. Our culture is in crisis. When we cave to its pressure, we actually forfeit our ability to make a difference because unlike our culture, which is just pointing fingers, grasping for solutions, we have spiritual power to offer them that will actually make a difference, change the human life, and ultimately will be the force that transforms the very society that we live in. And so a second reason to not be intimidated or to back down is because God has your back. Yahweh, the creator God of the universe, says, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you, utter all kinds of evil falsely against you on my account." That's right, it has to be a false accusation. If we suffer for doing evil, that's not right. We stand before God for that. But if we are suffering for doing what is right, then we are in good company. He says, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." God is the only judge who we truly stand before at the end of the day. And that even goes for civil judges. Regardless of how the laws of our nation change, at the end of the day, our ultimate authority remains God. Paul says, "I care very little if I am judged by you or any human courts. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me." Notice that Paul doesn't say that human opinions don't matter at all. He says, "I care very little if I'm judged by you." But what God thinks is just so much more important, that what people say, regardless of where they say it, if they say it to my face, if they write it on a blog, it doesn't matter. But regardless of what people say, what God thinks is just so much more important. I'm sure we've all had the experience of hearing that someone said something bad about us in either reacting strongly or just dismissing what the person has said. There's two things that determine the way that you react to what someone says about you. The first is what you think of the person. The second is what you think of yourself. If you see yourself as a blessed child of God, standing before God, the only judge, then it changes everything, doesn't it? It changes how we perceive what is said. It changes the way that we react to criticism, depending on how we view the source. And so the final thing that I want to say is that we also have a message of great power. In fact, the gospel is power. 1 Corinthians 1:18 says, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God." In Romans 1:16, we read that I am not ashamed of the gospel because of the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. And so the message that we wield is one, first of all, it's not our message. It's not something that I made up. It's not something that Western society produced. It is something which came from God. It caused offense in First Temple Judaism. In that culture, in that era, it causes offense today, but it is the message of God. And it has power because it is true and because it is based on something that will still be here 10,000 years from now versus whatever is happening in our society in this moment. I really like what Douglas Hyde says. He's thinking about these same ideas and applying them in his book, Dedication and Leadership. He was a leader in the British Communist Party. He knew something about dedication, about sacrifice, but he left that revolution for a better revolution, a kingdom revolution, when he came to faith in Jesus. But he was shocked and disappointed by what he found in the church. He says, "Coming straight, as it were, from one world to another, it astounded me. There should be people with such numbers at their disposal, with the truth on their side, going around and weighed down by the thought that they were a small, beleaguered minority, carrying on some impossible fight against a big majority. The very concept was wrong, and psychologically, it was calamitous." He's speaking about the way in which Christians, when they're persecuted, or when they sense that they're kind of in opposition to the culture, start to see themselves as a small, beleaguered minority. It's as if we think that we're in a fight that we can't possibly win, that the culture and its resources are going to overcome us in some way, when in reality, we stand with the power of God. We actually do have numbers in our specific situation. We have the truth of God on our side, but yet we adopt a lens that's been crafted by Satan that makes us see ourselves as if we're diminished, as if we lack resources, when in reality, we have the undefeatable resources of God. What a mistake it would be to back down under such conditions. But this is exactly how Satan wants us to think about ourselves. Many leaders in our church have a sense that God is about to open up a wide door before this church. Not just before Dwell, but before Christians in general in our country, but also in this specific city. We have an opportunity. God is going to open things up as the pandemic winds down, as the cultural crisis that we've been in continues. People are looking for answers, and God has a purpose for us in this moment. And if we walk through that door, we're going to find that there's glory on the other side. God has miracles that he wants us to perform, amazing things that he wants us to do, but there is also persecution. And so we need to be sober-minded as we look to the opportunities that God's putting in front of us, to not hold any illusions about what's going to happen as we go forward in the purposes of God, but to look back to what God has done for us, to what God has given us, and to walk through that door with confidence, because you and I have no reason to be ashamed. We have no reason to be intimidated. And we can speak to people in our society knowing that God has our back and that ultimately we have the words of life, which God has entrusted us with, that we might go and take them to a world that is hurting.